ever since I've been into watches, and probably for long after I leave, people have been comparing Rolex and Omega, and specifically telling Omega what they need to do to improve, to catch up and pass Rolex. I've indulged in that myself. I think we need to stop. I don't think that they are competitors, and more to the point, I don't think we even want them to be competitors for that top spot. As I said, this is a game I've indulged in myself, pitting Rolex against Omega and trying to find a way for Omega to pass Rolex. But I've come to imagine, or come to believe, that they're actually not competitors. See, competitors are people who are both striving for the same goal. I'm competing with you if we're both trying to become the head of the same department. I'm competing with you if we're both trying to win Wimbledon. If we're both men and we're both trying to win Wimbledon men's singles title, for example. So Roger Federer and Rafa Nadal are definitely competitors. They're out to win that one trophy. But they're not competitors with Serena Williams. She's trying to win something completely different. And I see that's the relationship between Rolex and Omega. Yes, in exactly the same way as Rafa and Serena are both tennis players at the highest level, trying to be the best they can and trying to win their respective competitions, they're in different competitions. They're fighting against different people. And I think that's the case with Rolex and Omega. It really came home to me when I was watching a recent video that was on Theo and Harris. And it made me go back and look at some old surveys and some old stuff that I've sort of looked at on other forums, and making lists and dividing it all up. And what I found is, in general, when Rolex and Omega people describe both their brands and the opposite brands, they basically give each brand very similar attributes. But where the difference comes is where they put the positives and the negatives, which is a brand, which is something that they want and which is something that they don't want. What you end up seeing is these are brands with fundamentally different characters, fundamentally different ideals that appeal to very different people. Rolex and Omega are rarely competing to get a single individual to make a choice one way or the other. I would say that that choice, 99 times out of 100, has been made well before the watch was designed, the colors were chosen, the movement was picked, the watch was sized, based solely on the attributes, the characteristics, the values of the brands. And for that reason, I don't think the brands actually compete. They're aiming at different people. And I think that when you see, the stakes of the stocks of one brand go up and the other brand go down, it's less about what the brand is doing and it's more about how we are changing. And the next point is then, if that's the case, do we want Omega chasing Rolex? Do we really want Omega going after the throne, going after the crown, being like Rolex? Because you see, for watch enthusiasts, for those of you who are probably watching this video, I think that the kinds of things that separate the two brands tend to be things like, do you value novelty or do you value predictability? Do you value variety and choice, or do you value consistency and tight discipline of control of inventory? Do you value accessibility, or do you value the fight to get that special thing? And those are generally fairly comfortable things. I think pretty much everyone would agree that's where the differences are from an enthusiast's point of view. But for the mainstream, for the vast bulk of people that aren't enthusiasts but buy these watches, I think the core difference between Omega and Rolex is all captured in this clip.
You see this watch? You see this watch?
Yeah.
That watch costs more than your car. I made $970,000 last year. How much you make? You see, pal, that's who I am, and you're nothing.
Okay, if you haven't seen it, that's the salesman giving his famous Always Be Closing speech in the 1992 film Glengarry Glen Ross. That scene only makes sense when the salesman berating the other worker has a gold Rolex. That character would only have a Rolex. The film people would only give that character a Rolex. And us as an audience watching it would only believe it if he had a Rolex. Like it or not, Rolex has that unique position. No other brand has that mainstream association with hierarchy, success, having made it, exclusion, that sort of thing. I'm not the only one that sees this. Time and Tide did a whole article about how Rolex has become the brand of the dead behind the eyes serial killer or corporate psychopath. They don't like it very much. They took legal action to stop their name being used in the movie American Psycho. Couldn't stop it being the second most mentioned brand in the book, however. Universally, if you've got a bad guy and you need to point out that he's a douche, you're going to give him a Rolex. Like it or not, that's how it's seen. And I strongly suspect that is actually the characteristic that puts Rolex on top, that puts Rolex above everyone else and separates them from every other brand beneath them. So the question becomes, if you're a fan of one of those brands beneath Rolex, is that a price you're prepared to pay? Do you watch that scene from Glengarry Glen Ross wishing that it hadn't have been a Rolex, that he had been using an Omega to berate and belittle his staff, or he'd been using a Zenith or a Breitling or a Cartier? Do you wish that that had been your brand? If not, I suspect you don't really want your brand being a competitor to Rolex, because I think to get to the top of the Morgan Stanley World Cup, I think that's who you got to appeal to. I think that's the characteristics your brand has to take on. Maybe not in our space, maybe not in the enthusiast space, but as we constantly tell ourselves, we aren't the ones that decide who is on top of those charts. That's decided by mainstream. That's decided by normies who just don't come here. They don't know all of the things we know about the brands. So, is that what you'd want? My position is no. If I was a fan, and I am a fan of a brand that's kind of in that scrum that wants to rise up, in being a Breitling fan. But I'd be horrified if Breitling chased that kind of characteristic. I would change brands and go somewhere else if Breitling decided that's the market, that's our market I wanted to chase. So personally, like I said, I don't think Omega and Rolex are even competitors. And more than that, I don't think Omega fans really want them to be. I don't think any of us want our brands to really do what it has to be done to try and take the throne, try and take the crown from Rolex. What about you guys? What do you think? I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches. Hit the whole like and subscribe thing. I will see you later. Bye.